The sun was already low when he turned onto the service road, that particular shade of amber that doesn't warm anything, it just reminds you the cold is coming. The grassland stretched out flat on both sides, dry and pale, the kind of landscape that makes you feel like you're the only person left on earth. He wasn't looking for anything, just finishing the last pass of the day, and then he saw it, pulled over slowly, rolled down the window, squinted through the fading light. There, at the edge of the road, sitting next to a dirty, crumpled plastic bag, was a Pallas's cat, a manual, compact, dense-furred, flat-faced, with eyes that always look like they're deciding something about you. One of the most elusive wild cats on the steppe, the kind of animal that disappears before you even realize you've seen one. But this one wasn't disappearing. It was just sitting there. He stepped out of the vehicle slowly, one boot on the gravel, then the other. The manual turned and looked directly at him, and didn't move. That was the first wrong thing. Every instinct a Pallas's cat has is built around not being seen. They don't sit in open fields next to roads at sunset. They don't hold still when a human steps toward them. They vanish. That's what they do. He took another step. The cat looked down at the bag, then back at him, and pulled it closer with one paw. He stopped walking, stood there in the cold for a moment, just watching. In 15 years of wildlife work, he had learned to read animals the way some people read weather, not perfectly, but well enough to know when something was off, and everything about this was off. The cat's ears weren't flat, it wasn't hissing, it wasn't in a defensive crouch, it was just staying, close to the bag, body low but not coiled, eyes tracking every small movement he made. He took out his radio, spoke quietly, didn't take his eyes off the animal. "I need someone out on Route 7, kilometer marker 14, bring the soft kit, and drive slow." He waited. The wind moved through the grass in long, slow waves. The manual made a sound, not a hiss, not a growl, something softer, something that didn't have an obvious name. It looked down at the bag again, then back up at him. He'd seen animals guard food before. He'd seen mothers guard young. He'd seen injured animals protect their own injured bodies out of pure fear. But this felt different from all of those things, and he couldn't yet say why. Just a feeling that settled in somewhere behind the sternum, the way certain moments do before you fully understand them. The bag wasn't moving, but the cat wasn't leaving it. When the second vehicle arrived, they approached together, slowly, wide angle, no direct line toward the animal. The manual tracked them both. Its weight shifted. The soft sound came again, quieter this time. One of the officers crouched down about 4 meters out, just to reduce his profile, just to make the space feel smaller and less threatening. The cat looked at him, then repositioned itself, not retreating, not advancing, just placing its body more squarely between the two humans and the bag. "It's protecting it," the crouching officer said quietly, not a question. "Yeah, from what? There's nothing in there, it's just trash." But the manual didn't treat it like trash. It treated it like the most important thing in this field. They waited another few minutes, let the animal settle, let the light drop another degree, spoke in low voices, moved in small increments. Finally, they were close enough. The manual's breathing was visible now, short, careful breaths, the fur along its spine slightly raised. Its eyes moved between the two men with the steady focus of an animal doing a calculation it didn't have words for. One officer reached slowly toward the edge of the bag. The cat leaned forward, paw on the plastic, not striking, just refusing. He pulled his hand back, waited, tried again. This time the manual made a sound that stopped both of them cold. Not aggression, something closer to desperation. And that's when he saw it, a small shift in the plastic near the bottom of the bag. Not the wind, not his imagination, movement. Something inside the bag had moved. He looked at the manual. The manual looked back at him, and in that cold, fading light, at the edge of an empty road in the middle of nowhere, he understood that whatever was in that bag, this wild, solitary, impossibly private animal, had decided it was worth staying for, worth being seen for. The question was what, exactly, had it found? They didn't rush. That was the first rule, and they both knew it. A stressed wild animal makes mistakes. So do stressed humans. And right now the manual was already at the edge of what it could tolerate. Body tight, eyes wide, that low vocalization coming in short intervals like a warning that hadn't quite decided what it was warning about. The younger officer shifted his weight, and the cat flinched, just slightly. "Just enough. Slow," the senior man said quietly, not to the cat, to his colleague. They gave it another minute, let the animal recalibrate, let the silence do some of the work. The manual paced a short line, 2 steps left, 2 steps back, then returned to the bag, pressed close to it. That sound again, softer now, almost internal, the kind of sound an animal makes not to communicate outward, but because it can't help making it. There are things you learn in fieldwork that nobody teaches you directly. One of them is this: when a wild animal stays near something instead of fleeing from danger, it's not confused. Confusion makes animals run. What keeps them rooted, what overrides every survival instinct they have, is something closer to necessity. He had seen it once before. A red fox returning to a culvert pipe 3 times despite 2 humans standing nearby. They'd found her kits inside. She came back because she had no other option that made sense to her. This felt like that. This felt exactly like that. They moved in together, slow arc, crouching low. Voices dropped to almost nothing. The manual repositioned again, front paws on the bag now, head low, watching them from under its brow. Its ears swiveled once toward the road, then back, checking, calculating. The senior officer reached out his hand, not toward the bag, just into the space between them, letting the animal see it, letting it decide. The manual sniffed the air in his direction, didn't retreat. He moved another half-meter forward. The cat's breathing quickened, visible now, the chest moving faster, but it held its ground. One more slow reach toward the edge of the plastic. This time the manual didn't press its paw down to stop him. It just watched, still vocalizing, still present. But something had shifted, barely, in the way it was holding itself, like a door that hadn't opened but had stopped being locked. He folded back the top of the bag. Both men went still. Inside, curled together in a loose, motionless pile, were kittens, 4 of them. Small enough to fit in one cupped hand. Pale, thin, the kind of cold that isn't just temperature, it's the cold of a body that has been running low for a long time. Nobody spoke. The younger officer exhaled slowly through his nose. The senior man stayed completely still for a moment, just looking, letting what he was seeing fully arrive. The manual made a sound behind them. Neither man turned around immediately. Then the senior officer leaned in closer, tilted his head, and something snagged in his mind. He looked at the fur, the markings, the shape of the ears, the structure of the face. He looked back at the manual, then at the kittens again. "These aren't hers," he said. The younger officer looked up. "What?" "Look at the markings, the coloring. These aren't manual kittens." A pause. "Then what are they?" He shook his head slowly. "Domestic, or feral domestic. Somebody's barn cats maybe, dumped out here." The words landed quietly in the cold air. Both men understood what that meant. This wild animal, solitary by nature, territorial, built for a life that had no room in it for anything that didn't directly serve survival, had found a bag of abandoned kittens on a roadside, and stayed. For how long they couldn't know. The ground around the bag was disturbed. Paw prints in the soft dirt at the road's edge, circling, signs of an animal that had been moving around this spot repeatedly, not passing through it. The bag itself had been shifted, nudged, repositioned, its opening partially folded inward in a way that suggested the manual had been arranging it, blocking the wind maybe, creating some small shelter from the temperature drop. The younger officer sat back on his heels, looked at the manual, still pacing its short line behind them. "How long do you think she's been out here?" "Hard to say. Few hours at least, maybe more. Just guarding them. Looks like it." Another silence. "Why would she do that?" The senior officer didn't answer right away. He was looking at the kittens again, checking each one, his fingers gentle and practiced. "I don't know," he finally said. "Maybe she lost her own litter. Maybe it's something simpler than that. Maybe it's something we don't have a clean explanation for." Either way, she stayed. They began moving the kittens carefully into the carry case, one by one, hands warmed first against jacket lining, movements slow and deliberate. The manual watched every transfer with absolute attention, head tracking, weight forward, that persistent low sound underneath everything. 3 kittens, then a 4th. Then the younger officer's hand stopped. He leaned in, stayed very still for a moment. "This one," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The senior officer was already moving. The last kitten, tucked farthest back in the corner of the bag, the smallest of them, almost hidden under the others, was barely moving, a faint, irregular rise of the chest, eyes sealed shut. A thin, reedy sound coming from somewhere deep in its throat that was less a cry and more a signal. the sound a body makes when it is working very hard just to keep going. He had maybe minutes. "Move," the senior officer said, and they ran. The drive back felt longer than it was. He kept the heat running full. The carry case sat on the passenger seat, and he drove with one hand and kept the other rested near the mesh panel, not touching, just close. The way you stay near something fragile without wanting to disturb it. The three stronger kittens were quiet, conserving. The fourth one made that sound the whole way. That thin, reedy, effortful sound. He pressed the accelerator down another fraction and watched the dark road ahead. At the rescue center, they moved fast but not frantically. Frantic doesn't help. Frantic is about the humans, not the animal. The staff here knew the difference, had learned it across hundreds of intakes, the hard ones and the ones that turned out fine, and the ones you couldn't predict going in. Heat support first. A warm surface, not hot. The body had to come back gradually. Force it too fast and you cause a different kind of damage. Fluids, carefully administered. Hydration and glucose, given in small increments. The three stable kittens responded within the first hour. Small movements, weak, uncoordinated, but present. A front paw pushing against nothing. A mouth opening, signs of a body remembering what it was supposed to do. The fourth kitten was handled separately, in a quieter corner of the room, with two staff members who didn't speak much and didn't need to. The mule had been transported in a separate carrier. Standard protocol for a wild animal. Isolation room, minimal stimulation, water available, no approach unless necessary. Give it time to decompress, let the stress hormones work their way down. The capture alone is enough to send a wildcat system into a state that takes hours to fully recover from. They checked on her through the observation window. She was pacing. Not the frantic pacing of an animal in full distress. No crashing against the walls, no self-injury, no desperate clawing at the door. Just a steady, repetitive line, back and forth across the far side of the enclosure, pausing occasionally to lift her head, ears rotating, listening. "She's looking for something," one of the younger staff members said. The senior officer had come in to check the intake reports. He stopped at the observation window and watched her for a moment. The manual paused at the far wall, turned, scanned the room slowly with those flat, pale eyes. Listening again. "She thinks they're still with her," he said quietly. A pause. "She thinks they're hers now." Nobody responded to that, not because it wasn't worth responding to, because some things land in a room and the right reaction is just to let them sit there. The food dish went untouched. They noted it, monitored it, didn't force anything. A wild animal refusing food in the first 24 hours of captivity isn't unusual. The stress alone shuts the appetite down. But there was something specific about the way she kept returning to the same corner of the enclosure, pressing close to the wall, going still, listening. One of the staff members, a woman who had worked wildlife rehab for over a decade, stood at the window for a long time that first evening. "I've seen animals grieve," she said to no one in particular. "I've seen mothers who lost litters shut down completely, won't eat, won't engage, just go somewhere internal." She watched the manual pace her quiet line. "This feels different. She's not grieving, she's waiting." By the second morning, the three stable kittens had improved enough to take small amounts of formula. It was slow work. Syringe feeding requires patience and a steady hand and the ability to read a tiny animal's cues, when it's swallowing, when it's fatiguing, when to stop and let it rest. The staff rotated through in shifts, keeping the sessions short and the handling gentle. The kittens were growing, incrementally, into something that resembled stability. The fourth one was still the question. It had made it through the first night, which the senior vet had quietly described as the part she hadn't been certain about. The respiratory function was irregular. The body temperature had taken longer to stabilize than they wanted. It was eating almost nothing. But it was still making that sound, that thin, effortful sound. And as long as it kept making that sound, they kept working. On the second afternoon, something shifted. The vet was doing a routine check, the kitten resting in a warmed cloth in her palm, when it turned its head, just slightly, toward her hand. She went very still. The kitten's mouth opened, closed, opened again. A cry, weak, barely audible, but different from the distress sound, rounder, more deliberate. She looked up at the staff member across the table. Neither of them said anything. The kitten cried again. And the room, which had been quietly tense for 2 days, exhaled. They didn't celebrate loudly. That's not how these moments usually go. There was no sudden whooping or dramatic announcement, just a few people standing a little straighter, a hand resting briefly on a colleague's shoulder. Someone stepping out to make a quiet phone call. The senior officer heard about it from across the building. He nodded once when they told him, looked at the floor for a moment, then walked to the observation window to check on the manual. She was in the far corner again, but she wasn't pacing. She was sitting, still, compact, her tail wrapped around her front paws, her eyes half closed, not relaxed exactly. Wild animals in captivity don't fully relax, but something in her posture had settled. The tight, searching energy of the previous 2 days had softened into something quieter. He stood there watching her for a while. He didn't have a clean explanation for what he was seeing, couldn't prove anything about what she understood or didn't understand, couldn't claim she somehow knew the kittens had turned a corner, but the timing was hard to ignore. And he'd been doing this long enough to know that sometimes you just let a thing be what it appears to be. The question had been sitting in the back of every conversation since the night they brought her in. It hadn't been asked directly yet, because there had been more urgent things to focus on. But now the kittens were stable, the immediate crisis had passed, the paperwork was starting to accumulate on the senior officer's desk, and one of the forms had a section he couldn't leave blank much longer. Disposition of wildlife. He sat down with the vet that evening. Coffee going cold between them, the center quiet around them. She can't stay, the vet said. I know, even if she's calm now, long-term captivity for a manual this age, it causes problems, physical problems, behavioral deterioration. It's not a life. I know, he said again, a pause. The kittens aren't hers. They'll go to a domestic foster placement once they're strong enough. That's the right call. He nodded slowly, turned his coffee cup in his hands. So we release her. He looked out the window into the dark. The right answer and the easy answer aren't always the same thing. He knew that, had always known that. It didn't make the moment any simpler. When? He asked. Few more days. Make sure she's eating. Make sure the stress levels are down. She paused. And then we let her go back to where she belongs. He sat with that for a moment. Outside, somewhere down the hall, one of the kittens made a small sound. And the hardest part wasn't the release itself. The hardest part was what came just before it. The days that followed were quieter. Not empty. The center was always moving, always something that needed doing, but quieter in the way that follows crisis. The sharp edge of urgency had softened into the steadier work of recovery, feeding schedules, weight checks, small incremental improvements recorded in notebooks with careful handwriting. The kittens grew. Slowly, improbably they grew. The 3 stronger ones had graduated from syringe feeding to a shallow dish by the 4th day. Messy, inefficient, more formula on their faces than in their stomachs, but the instinct was there, the reaching, the trying. The 4th one took a little longer. It always took a little longer, but it got there. By the 6th day it was feeding alongside the others, smallest in the group, still a little unsteady on its legs, but present, engaged, making the rounded, deliberate sounds of a kitten that has decided, on some level below language or thought, that it intends to stay. The senior vet waited on the 7th morning and wrote the number down without comment. Then she looked at it for a moment, sitting in the palm of her hand, eyes barely open, breathing steadily, and allowed herself a small, private expression that she didn't bother explaining to anyone. Some things don't need explaining. The manual had started eating on the 3rd day, not enthusiastically, not the way a relaxed animal eats. She approached the dish carefully, checked the room, checked the door, checked the dish again, ate quickly and retreated, but she ate. And the next day she ate a little more. And the day after that she finished what was offered, and sat near the dish for a while afterward, which the staff noted as a quiet kind of progress. Her pacing had stopped. She spent most of her time in the elevated corner of the enclosure, a shelf positioned near the back wall where she could see the entire room without being in the center of it. Wild cats find the high ground. It's not preference so much as architecture, the way their minds are built. From up there, everything is visible, everything can be assessed. She watched the staff move through their routines, didn't hide from them, but didn't seek them out. Held that careful middle distance that a wild animal maintains when it has decided something is not an immediate threat, but has not decided anything beyond that. It was, the senior officer thought, about the best you could ask for. The foster placement for the kittens was arranged by the end of the week. A woman about 40 minutes outside the city, retired, had done domestic foster work for years, had the space and the patience and the particular temperament that fragile young animals seem to locate and move toward, like a compass finding north. She came to the center on a Thursday afternoon, sat with the kittens for a long time before picking any of them up, just let them come to her, let them climb on her hands and investigate her jacket sleeves and make their small, uncertain sounds while she stayed still and let them figure her out. The fourth kitten was the last to approach. Took its time, circled twice, sniffed her hand from a careful distance, then walked directly onto her palm and sat down. The woman looked up at the staff member standing nearby. "This one," she said quietly, not asking, just acknowledging something that had already been decided. "That's the one," the staff member said. The release was planned for early morning. They had monitored the manual for 9 days. She was eating consistently. Her weight had stabilized. The stress behaviors had reduced to a level that the vet described, carefully, as acceptable, not gone, because for a wild animal in captivity there is no such thing as gone, but manageable, baseline. The location chosen was within her likely home range. Same grassland corridor where she'd been found. The logic being that familiar territory reduces the disorientation of release, gives the animal existing mental maps to work from, known water sources, known shelter, known ground. They loaded her carrier into the vehicle before dawn. She didn't vocalize during the drive, sat in the back of the carrier, compact and still, in that particular way she had of making herself seem smaller than she was. The senior officer drove. He didn't play the radio. They reached the site as the sky was beginning to pale at the edges. That early light that isn't quite dawn yet, gray and thin and very clean. The grassland stretched out around them, frost on the upper layer of the grass, the kind of cold that has weight to it. He set the carrier down in the flat open area beside the road, crouched in front of it, looked through the mesh at the manual inside. She looked back at him, those flat, pale eyes, that expression that always seemed to be arriving at a conclusion about something. He had done dozens of releases, maybe more. He knew the protocol. Open the door, step back, give the animal space and time and silence. Don't crowd the moment. Don't make it about yourself. He knew all of that. He opened the door and stepped back. She didn't come out immediately. That's almost always how it goes. The door opens and the animal reassesses. New information, new smells, the quality of the air, the sound of the wind, the particular texture of this specific morning. She put her nose to the opening first, held there for a long moment. Then one paw came forward onto the frost-covered ground. She felt the surface under her pad, pulled it back once, then placed it again, more deliberately this time. The second paw followed. Then she was out. She stood just outside the carrier for a moment, very still, head low, reading the landscape with everything she had. Her ears moved independently, one toward the tree line, one toward the road. Her tail was low and straight. Her breath made small clouds in the cold air. The senior officer stood about 4 meters back, didn't move, didn't speak. The Manuel turned her head and looked at him, just once. It wasn't a long look. It wasn't cinematic. She didn't hold his gaze for a meaningful moment while something swelled on the soundtrack. That's not how animals work, and he knew it, and he wouldn't have wanted it any other way. She just looked. The way a wild animal looks at something it has assessed and found to be, for now, in this moment, not a threat. Then she turned back to the grassland, took 3 steps forward, paused once more, and walked into the pale morning until the frost-colored grass closed around her and she was simply gone. He stood there for a while after. The cold worked its way through his jacket. The light kept coming, slow and even, the way it does out here where there's nothing to interrupt it. He thought about the bag on the roadside. He thought about the 4th kitten, breathing its thin, effortful breath in the corner of the carry case. He thought about the woman on Thursday afternoon, sitting still while a small, uncertain animal circled her hand and made its decision. He thought about 9 days ago, standing in the fading light of a flat grassland, trying to understand why a solitary wild cat was refusing to leave a piece of roadside trash. He still didn't have a clean explanation. He wasn't sure he needed one. Some things you encounter in this work that don't resolve into a lesson or a theory. They just stay with you. They become part of how you see things afterward, part of the lens, if that makes sense, a recalibration of what you thought you understood about where certain instincts begin and end. He picked up the empty carrier, walked back to the vehicle. The grassland was fully lit now, gold and quiet, the frost already beginning to lift off the grass in thin, rising threads. And standing there in the cold wind, he realized something none of them had expected going in. Not a revelation exactly, not something you could write on a wall, just a quiet, settled understanding that compassion, the real kind, the kind that costs something, the kind that asks nothing back, doesn't always look the way you imagine it will. Sometimes it has frost on its fur. Sometimes it's found sitting beside a dirty bag on an empty road, making a sound no one has a name for. Sometimes it appears in the last place you'd ever think to look for it, and when it does, you just stand there in the cold, and you're grateful you were paying attention.